I never believed in love at first sight. I thought it was a lie we told ourselves to make the chaos of attraction seem like destiny. My life was a carefully constructed thing, all straight lines and muted colors, a quiet existence in a small town where the biggest event of the week was the fluctuation of produce prices at the local market. I was 18, but I felt 100, my youth already buried under a pile of responsibilities and a future that had been mapped out for me since I learned to walk. College was the expected next step, a means to an end, not an adventure. I was to study business, take over my father's modest accounting firm, marry a nice local boy, and live a life of quiet, predictable comfort. The thought of it made my chest feel tight, like I was already wearing a suit that was 2 sizes too small. Then I walked into her classroom. It was a Tuesday, I think. The air was thick with the late summer heat, humming with the lethargy of cicadas. American Literature 201, a required course. I took a seat in the back, near the window, a habit born from a desire to observe rather than be seen. The room smelled of old books and chalk dust, a scent I associated with boredom. I was already mentally calculating the minimum effort required to pass when the door opened and she walked in. The world did not stop. No choir of angels sang. But the air in the room, it shifted. It became charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm. She wasn't what I expected. She wasn't stern or matronly. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, with a quiet grace that seemed to calm the very dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. Her hair was the color of dark honey, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She wore a simple, navy blue dress, and when she turned to write her name on the board, Dr. Eleanor Vance, her handwriting was an elegant, looping script. Her voice was the first thing that truly undid me. It was low and melodic, a voice that didn't need to rise to command attention. She spoke about Fitzgerald not as a dead author, but as a woman who understood the exquisite pain of longing. She talked about the green light at the end of Daisy's dock not as a symbol, but as a physical ache. She didn't just teach the words, she seemed to live inside them, to feel their rhythm and heartbeat. I stopped looking out the window. I stopped thinking about business degrees and balance sheets. I just listened. I watched the way her hands moved as she spoke, the faint, thoughtful frown that would appear between her brows when a student asked a difficult question, the way she'd tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. It was terrifying. This was more than a crush. A crush is a superficial, fleeting thing. This was a fundamental recognition, a dizzying, soul-deep sense of seeing a color I never knew existed. Every Tuesday and Thursday, that classroom became the only place that felt real. The rest of my life faded into a dull gray blur. I lived for those 75 minutes, for the sound of her voice, for the rare, fleeting moment when her eyes would scan the room and, for a heartbeat, meet mine. In those moments, I felt seen. Not as the daughter of the local accountant, not as a student with a decent grade point average, but as me, whoever that was. I started participating in class discussions, my voice unsteady at first. I wrote my papers with a fervor I'd never applied to anything, spending hours in the library, not just to get a good grade, but to find a passage, a turn of phrase that might impress her, that might make her nod slowly and offer one of her rare, genuine smiles. When she handed back my first essay with excellent insights scribbled in the margin in that familiar looping script, I felt a jolt of pure, undiluted joy. I carried that paper with me for a week, the ink smudging from how often I unfolded it to read those 2 words. The tension was a physical presence. It was in the space between our hands when she returned a book to me. It was in the way the air would still when we were the last 2 in the classroom, me pretending to pack my bag slowly, her organizing her notes. It was in the charged silence that followed a question I asked that was a little too personal, a little too outside the curriculum. We were orbiting each other, two celestial bodies caught in a gravitational pull we were both desperately trying to ignore. The first crack appeared during her office hours. I went under the pretense of discussing my final paper topic on the destructive nature of idealism in The Great Gatsby. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs as I walked down the empty hallway. Her door was slightly ajar. I knocked, my knuckles feeling like brittle sticks. She was sitting behind a desk piled high with books, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked up, and for a moment, there was no professional mask, just surprise and something else, a flicker of that same nervous energy I was feeling. "Come in," she said, her voice softer than it was in the lecture hall. I sat in the worn leather chair opposite her, the smell of old paper and her perfume, something like jasmine and rain, filling my senses. I stumbled through my prepared questions. She answered thoughtfully, but her eyes kept drifting to my face, lingering a second too long. We were talking about Gatsby's obsession, but the subtext in the room was so thick it was a miracle we could breathe. Then, as I was leaving, my hand on the doorknob, she spoke again. "You have a very old soul for someone your age." I turned back. Her gaze was direct, unguarded. It felt like standing in a spotlight. "Sometimes I feel 100 years old," I said, the truth tumbling out before I could stop it. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "I know the feeling." That was it. That was all. But in that exchange, something monumental happened. The line between teacher and student blurred, and for the first time, we were just two people acknowledging a shared loneliness. I walked out of that office and into the cool autumn air, my entire world rearranged. She saw me. She truly saw me. A week passed, then another. The semester was hurtling towards its end, and with it, a terrifying finality. Once her class was over, what reason would I have to see her? What thread would connect our worlds? The thought was a constant, cold knot in my stomach. I started seeing a girl from her class, Sarah, hanging around her office door. She was a senior, confident, with an easy smile, and she looked at Eleanor with a familiarity that made my stomach clench with a jealousy I had no right to feel. Was she just a keen student? Or was it something more? The uncertainty was a special kind of torture. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday in November. The class had ended, and a downpour had trapped several of us under the building's awning. Sarah was there, standing close to her, making her laugh. I stood apart, watching the rain sheet down, feeling the familiar ache of exclusion. One by one, students dashed to their cars or pulled up hoods and sprinted into the deluge. Soon, it was just the three of us. Sarah offered Eleanor a ride. She declined politely, saying she had some grading to finish. She left with a disappointed shrug, shooting me a look I couldn't decipher. And then it was just us. The sound of the rain was a roar on the pavement, a curtain of water isolating us from the world. "You'll catch your death," she said, her voice barely audible over the storm. "I like the rain," I replied, and it was true. It felt fitting, this dramatic, cleansing weather. She was quiet for a moment, then she gestured with her head. "My car is just there. The blue sedan. I can give you a lift." Every rule, every boundary screamed in my head. This was a line. A big one. But the alternative was to walk away, to let this moment, this possibility, dissolve into the rain. I nodded. "Thank you." The inside of her car was intimately hers. The same jasmine and rain scent, a stack of graded papers on the back seat, a worn copy of a poetry collection on the dashboard. The windows fogged up almost immediately, sealing us in our own private, steamy universe. She started the engine, and the heater blew warm air around our ankles. "Where to?" she asked, her hands tight on the steering wheel. I gave her my address, a quiet street on the other side of town. The drive was silent, but it was the most profound silence I had ever experienced. It was filled with the thrum of the engine, the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers, and the sound of our breathing. I could feel the heat radiating from her body, just a foot away from mine. I watched her profile, the concentration in her eyes, the way she bit her lower lip when she made a turn. We pulled up in front of my house. The lights were off. My parents were still at work. It was just a dark, empty house. "Thank you for the ride, Dr. Vance," I said, my hand on the door handle. "Eleanor," she said softly, her eyes fixed on the rain-streaked windshield. "When it's just us, you can call me Eleanor." I looked at her. She finally turned her head, and her gaze was wide, vulnerable, and full of the same terrifying hope I felt. The world outside was a watery blur. We were the only two solid things in it. I don't know which of us moved first. Maybe we both did, leaning into that gravitational pull that had been tugging at us for months. Our first kiss was not passionate or demanding. It was hesitant. A question. Her lips were soft and tasted of coffee and the faint, sweet trace of her lip balm. It was a brush of skin, a shared intake of breath, a moment of suspended animation where every rule, every consequence, every fear simply evaporated. It lasted only a second, two at most. We pulled apart, our faces inches from each other, our breath mingling in the humid air. Her eyes were wide with shock, and with something that looked like wonder. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I pushed the car door open and stumbled out into the rain. I didn't look back. I ran to my front door, fumbled with my keys, and fell inside, leaning against the closed door, my heart hammering so violently I thought it would break my ribs. The ghost of her lips on mine was a brand. I could still smell her perfume on my clothes. That kiss changed everything and nothing. We didn't talk about it. We couldn't. In class, we were more careful than ever, our interactions strictly professional, our eyes avoiding each other's. But beneath the surface, a new, secret understanding had been forged. We had crossed the Rubicon. There was no going back. A few days later, a book appeared in my campus mailbox. It was a collection of E. Cummings poems. There was no note, but a page was dog-eared. I opened it to the marked poem, my hands trembling. Since feeling is first who pays any attention to the syntax of things will never wholly kiss you, I read the lines over and over, my throat tight. It was a confession, a declaration, a risk she had taken. I found her after class in the now familiar solitude of her office hallway. She was locking her door. When she saw me, she stilled. I didn't say a word. I simply held up the book. A slow, beautiful blush crept up her neck, coloring her cheeks. I stepped closer into her space, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. I leaned in, and this time, the kiss was not a question. It was an answer. It was deeper, more certain, filled with all the weeks of pent-up longing and silent conversations. Her hand came up to cradle my jaw, her thumb stroking my cheek, and I felt her surrender in the sigh that escaped her lips. That was the beginning of our secret life. We became masters of deception, architects of a hidden world built in the spaces between our public lives. Our relationship was a series of stolen moments, each one a precious, glittering shard of a whole we could never openly assemble. We never went on a traditional date. Our courtship happened in the hushed stillness of empty art galleries on free admission days, our fingers secretly linking for a fleeting moment as we stood before a painting. It happened on long, meandering drives in her car, the windows down, the radio playing softly, our hands resting on the console, pinkies intertwined. It happened in the dusty silence of the public library's history section, where we would sit at a table, ostensibly studying, our knees touching beneath the wood, a current of electricity flowing between us. I learned the landscape of her. The way she laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that was rare and beautiful. The small scar above her eyebrow from a childhood fall. The way she hummed when she was concentrating. The fears she whispered to me in the dark. Her terror of being stuck, of living a life that looked perfect on paper but felt hollow inside. She was 10 years older than me, but in those moments, the age difference vanished. We were just two lost people who had found a harbor in each other. The first night we spent together was not planned. It was a Tuesday. My parents were out of town for a wedding. The house was mine. I invited her over, my voice shaking on the phone. She arrived after dark, her collar turned up against the cold, looking like any other visitor, but to me, she was a secret revolution. We didn't rush. We cooked a simple pasta dinner together in my family's kitchen, moving around each other with a natural, easy rhythm. We talked about everything and nothing. We drank a cheap bottle of red wine, and the world felt soft at the edges. Later, we sat on the living room floor, our backs against the sofa, and I put on a record, some old jazz my father never played. The room was dark, lit only by the flickering light of a single candle. I remember tracing the line of her jaw with my finger. She closed her eyes, leaning into my touch. "This is dangerous," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "I know," I said. And I did. The risk was a constant, low hum in the background of my mind. The potential for ruin was real, for her career, for my future, for the fragile peace of my family. But in that moment, with her skin warm under my fingertips, the danger felt like a price I was willing to pay 1,000 times over. I leaned in and kissed her. It was the third kiss, and it was different from the first two. It was slow and deep, a conversation without words. It was a kiss that held all the unspoken promises and shared fears. It tasted of wine and vulnerability. My hands found their way into her hair, and her arms wrapped around my neck, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. That night, in the quiet sanctuary of my childhood bedroom, we shed our titles: teacher, student, older, younger. We were just Eleanor and, well, you don't even know my name yet, do you? You've been listening to me pour my heart out, and I haven't even given you that. It feels significant somehow. A final piece of the puzzle. My name is Maya. It means illusion in some languages, which felt painfully fitting for the double life I was leading. That night with Maya, we were just us. Two women discovering each other in the moonlit dark. It wasn't about frantic passion. It was a slow, reverent exploration. I remember the warmth of her skin under my palms, the soft gasp she made when I found a particular spot on her neck, the way our limbs tangled together under the sheets as if trying to become one single entity. It was a surrender, a confession made not with words, but with touch. I learned the weight of her body on mine, the rhythm of her breath syncing with my own, the feeling of her heart beating against my chest. It was the most intimate conversation of my life. Afterwards, we lay together in the quiet, her head on my shoulder, my fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare back. We whispered in the dark, our voices hushed, as if the world outside was listening. She told me about her first love, a woman in graduate school who broke her heart. I told her about the pressure I felt from my parents, the suffocating certainty of the heterosexual life that awaited me. We shared our secrets, and in doing so, we sealed our own. Falling asleep with her in my arms was a profound peace I had never known. The simple act of waking up to the sight of her sleeping face, her hair fanned out across the pillow, felt more revolutionary than any act of rebellion I could have imagined. That morning, watching the dawn light paint her features in soft gold, I knew I was lost to her. I was irrevocably, completely in love. The spring semester began, and I was no longer in her class. The relief was immense, but it was replaced by a new kind of paranoia. Now, we had to be careful on the entire campus, not just in one classroom. We developed a system. A certain bench in a secluded part of the quad meant I need to see you. A specific book left on the passenger seat of my car was a signal. We were spies in our own lives. But secrets have a weight to them, and ours was getting heavier. The strain began to show. I saw the dark circles under her eyes, the nervous way she'd jump when her phone rang. I started to resent the world for forcing us to hide. I wanted to hold her hand walking down the street. I wanted to introduce her to my friends as my girlfriend. The guilt of deceiving my parents, who were good, simple people, began to eat at me. They liked to ask about my classes, my professors. I'd talk about everyone but her, my lies tasting like ash in my mouth. One afternoon, we were in a coffee shop 2 towns over, a place where we felt safe. We were sitting in a corner booth, and I reached across the table to hold her hand. She flinched, pulling her hand back as if my touch had burned her. Her eyes started around the room. "We can't, Maya. Not here." "Where then?" I asked, the frustration bubbling over. "Where's it safe for us to just be?" She looked down at her coffee, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know." That was the heart of it. There was no place. Our love was a thing that existed in the margins, in the stolen hours, in the spaces between everyone else's reality. The fear was a third person in our relationship, always sitting between us. The breaking point came from an unexpected direction. Sarah, the senior from her class, had seen us. She hadn't seen anything definitive, no kiss or embrace, but she'd seen us together too many times in too many out-of-the-way places. She saw the way we looked at each other when we thought no one was watching. She went to the head of the English department with a vague but insidious accusation of unprofessional familiarity. Eleanor was called into a meeting. They had no proof, nothing concrete, but the suspicion was enough. Her contract was up for renewal at the end of the year, and suddenly it was no longer a certainty. The threat was no longer abstract. It had a face and a name, and the power to destroy everything she had worked for. She came to my house that night, her face pale and drawn. She told me everything, her voice flat, defeated. "They can't prove anything, but they don't have to. The doubt is enough. They'll find a reason not to renew me. My career here is over." I felt a cold fury towards Sarah, towards the system, towards the entire town. "Then we'll leave," I said, the words rushing out. "We'll go somewhere else. You can teach anywhere. I'll transfer. We can start over where no one knows us." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a deep, bottomless sadness. "Maya, you're 19. Your whole life is here. Your family, your future." "You are my future," I said, the conviction in my voice surprising even me. It was then that we had our first real fight. A quiet, desperate battle of whispered fears and raised voices that we had to quickly smother. She was trying to protect me, to sacrifice our relationship for what she thought was my own good. I was fighting for us, for the only thing that had ever made me feel truly alive. We ended up clinging to each other in the dark, not as lovers, but as fellow survivors of a shipwreck, crying tears of frustration and fear. The decision was made for us in the most brutal way possible. My mother sat me down at the kitchen table a few days later. Her face was grim. "Honey," she began, and my blood ran cold. She had heard a nasty, vague rumor from a friend on the college board. Something about a young English professor and a female student. She didn't believe it, of course. She knew I was a good kid. But she wanted to warn me to be careful about appearances, about the wrong kind of people. I looked at my mother's face, so full of a concern that was laced with a prejudice I'd always suspected but never had to face so directly, and I knew I couldn't lie to her anymore. The weight of the secret was crushing me. So I told her. I confessed everything. I told her about Eleanor, about the books and the rain and the whispered conversations. I told her I loved her. The disappointment in her eyes was a physical blow. She didn't yell. She just looked scared. Maya, she said, her voice trembling. Do you understand what this could do to her? Do you? To this family? What will people say? You have to end it. Now, the world I had so carefully navigated was collapsing. I was trapped between the person I loved and the family I came from, forced to choose, and any choice I made would cause irreparable damage. I went to Eleanor. It was a Thursday. The air felt different, charged with an ending. I found her packing boxes in her small apartment. She had already resigned. She was leaving at the end of the semester. She was sacrificing her career to protect me, to try and quell the rumors before they could fully form and destroy us both. I can't let you do this, I said, my voice breaking. It's already done, she replied, her back to me. When she turned around, her eyes were dry but full of a resolved grief. This was always how it was going to end, Maya. We were just borrowing time. It doesn't have to end, I pleaded, grabbing her hands. Come with me. Now. Tonight. She cupped my face in her hands, her touch so familiar it made my heart ache. You have a life to live. A whole, open, honest life. You can't start it as a scandal, as a secret. You deserve to be able to love openly, proudly. We both do. And then she kissed me. It was our 5th kiss, and it was a goodbye. It was full of a lifetime of love and loss, of every what if and every never will be. It tasted of salt and finality. I held her as if I could imprint her body into mine, as if I could keep her through sheer force of will. She left a week later. There was no dramatic farewell. Just a final, lingering look in her now empty apartment, a squeeze of my hand, and then she was gone. The blue sedan drove away, and I stood on the curb, feeling like a part of my soul had been ripped out. That was 2 years ago. My name is Maya. I'm 21 now. I didn't transfer. I stayed. I made a different kind of life, one that is my own. I switched my major to literature. I'm working at the local bookstore, saving up to get my own place. My relationship with my mother is complicated. It's a work in progress, a slow, painful education. I thought time would dull the ache. It hasn't. It has just changed its shape. It's no longer a sharp, stabbing pain, but a deep, constant hum of absence, like the silence in a room after a beautiful piece of music has finished playing. I heard she's teaching at a small liberal arts college up north. I heard she's happy. I hope that's true. She was my teacher. She taught me about Fitzgerald and Cummings, about syntax and symbolism. But her most important lesson was about love. She taught me that love isn't always about holding on. Sometimes, the most profound act of love is letting go, even when every fiber of your being is screaming in protest. She gave me the courage to want a life of color and feeling, to reject the gray, predictable path that had been laid out for me. She was the one who showed me who I truly was. I still have the book of Cummings' poems. I still read the dog-eared page. Since feeling is first, she was my first real feeling. And in the end, she was the one who paid attention to the syntax of things, to the rules and the consequences, so that I could have a chance to someday kiss a woman wholly, openly, without the shadow of our secret. I loved her. I love her still. And in the quiet of the night, when the world is asleep, I sometimes allow myself to remember the warmth of her skin, the sound of her laughter, the way the rain sounded on the roof of her car that first time. And for a moment, in the secret theater of my memory, she is mine again, and our love is not a secret to be hidden, but a story to be cherished. A story I have now, finally, confessed to you.